Welcome back, everyone. In this next module, we're going to talk about one of my favorite deliverables in the user experience process, a user persona. Now, user personas don't apply. User personas are representative of your real user of your site. User personas are a tool that help you make decisions throughout the design process. But not every user out there is one of your personas. User personas are representative users. They're not real people. You don't take an interview with a candidate and write out their profile, and that becomes their persona. Although user personas are sometimes based on real people, they're usually an aggregate of multiple people out there that represent your user base. Let's talk a little bit about what user personas are and what they help us do in defining a strategy. The definition of a user persona is on the left. They're fictional characters drawn from user research that serve as example cases during UX development. They're sometimes referred to as profiles, but let's not confuse that term. User personas are fictional characters and representative of a segment of your audience. And why do we use personas to help us in the design process? Well, they work to remind us who our users are. We can constantly refer to, hey, what would Jane do? What would Jim do? Would this work for our users? Now, I'd hate to say that a user persona is based on a real person. It is representative and fictionalized, and purposely so. I always try to explain personas in a way that aggregates the best qualities of all of your users from across one specific audience segment. Imagine the habits and the hobbies of one user combined with the family situation of another and the geographic placement of another person into this mega person that represents everyone. That's a user persona. And that's why they become so helpful in the design process, because it's not just one single person that represents your entire demographic. It's not just one person that's representative from within your audience segment. It's one person that represents the entire audience segment. Here are some examples of personas that students have handed in to me over the years. Let me break down the components that we see in personas. These are two personas that, from a design aesthetic perspective, are a little different, but they include similar components. A persona needs to have a name. A first and last name is typical. Personas should also have basic demographic qualities like age, gender, occupation, and education. Then, of course, we need to include things in the narrative of our user persona, which means that we need to tell a story about this user. Sometimes we'll also call out psychographic qualities, like things they enjoy, skills that they have, and you'll see that a little bit represented in the one on the left. Most of the user personas that we include will have these types of components. And as you see, as I cycle through a few from different students over the years, that they typically include these things. It's always great to have a pull quote on these personas as well. Some of them become really interesting and almost tell their own story about the user. So how did my students come up with these personas? You start by understanding the specific information you need to gather about your users. So what do we need to know about our users? First, let's start by dialing it back a little bit. Before you can define a specific user persona, we must define our audience segments. Let's talk about how we achieve that. Let's first define what an audience segment is. An audience segment is a section of your users grouped into a specific demographic or psychographic grouping. Audience segmentation is that process of dividing people into homogeneous subgroups based on defined criterion such as product use, demographics, psychographics, communication behaviors, and media use. Ultimately, what we're doing is grouping like-minded people together so that we can evaluate them. If we can assemble our audience segments into disparate groups, we're able to evaluate them uniquely. That allows us to take one of these audience segments and create a representative, fictionalized user persona. Now, before we can group our audience into segments, we really need to understand who they are. Let's go through some steps to determine who our target users could be. So where do we start? Well, we need to define who they are. Are your target customers male or female? How old are they? Don't be afraid to put an age range. Where do they live? Is geography a limiting factor for any reason? What do they do for a living? How much money do they make? Now, this can be important sometimes, especially with luxury items. And sure, there are other aspects of their lives as well. For example, if you're launching a roof tiling service, your target customers will probably need to own homes. If you're launching a car detailing shop, you'll likely need to target users who own vehicles. Next, we need to determine their motivations. What are the top issues or problems they're looking to solve? What language do they use to describe these problems? What blogs do they regularly read? Who do they follow on Twitter? What social networks do they spend time on? These types of questions not only help us to define our user personas, but they also help with digital marketing channels. What magazines do they read? What conferences do they attend? Who influences their decisions online? These two groups of questions fall into two types of qualities. Demographic, that explain who the person is, and psychographic, explaining why they do what they do. Demographics are tangible things like gender, age, and geography, whereas psychographics are behavioral and emotional aspects. So what are some examples of demographic and psychographic qualities? To get started, I've put together a few for you in the next few slides. Here are a few ideas to get the ball rolling. Demographics, as I mentioned, can include age, gender, race, location, employment status, and many others. Whereas psychographics include attributes of your personality, information about the user's values, specific attitudes, interests, or lifestyles. For example, if a user likes to shop out of season to save money, that is an attitude. If they like to go skating on the weekends with their family, that's an interest. And if they enjoy traveling on their own, that's a lifestyle choice. So how do we get all of this information and create personas? First, you need to ask the right questions. The best place to start for this is asking your stakeholders. Stakeholders who are your clients will have a lot of this information at hand. If they have previous interaction with their users, they will likely be able to tell you a lot of information about them. But it doesn't stop there. In our next module, we'll be talking about user experience research and how we can build a bigger case to define our audience segmentation and our user personas. We'll see you in the next video.